Nobody expected a random off-season workout to feel this serious. But in Cleveland right now, that one image might end up defining the entire 2026 season. Because this isn't just Shedeur Sanders throwing routes with Jeudy. It's not just another quarterback-receiver session you scroll past on social media. There's something different about this one. The timing, the location, the history between these two. It all points to something bigger happening behind the scenes, something that most fans haven't fully connected yet. Think about it. New head coach, open quarterback competition, a locker room that's still trying to figure out its identity, and right in the middle of all that uncertainty, a second-year quarterback who hasn't been promised anything is already putting in work with his #1 target before the team even calls them in. That's not normal. That's not casual. That's calculated. And the part that should really get your attention, this comes at a time when the Browns are quietly standing at a crossroads. There's a veteran quarterback with a massive contract trying to prove he still belongs. There's a new coaching staff evaluating everything with zero emotional attachment. And there's a young quarterback who knows that if he doesn't take control of this moment right now, someone else will. So when that photo hit the internet, it wasn't just a cool off-season update. It was a signal, a message, maybe even a warning. Because what's happening in Cleveland right now isn't just about preparation, it's about a power shift. And once you understand the full story behind that workout, the tension, the numbers, the competition, and the stakes, you start to realize something pretty quickly. This might be the moment where everything changes. But to really see why that image matters as much as it does, you have to go back to how this whole thing actually started. It started with a single image, and within hours, the entire narrative around Cleveland's offseason began to shift. Shedeur Sanders and Jeudy standing side by side at the T3 Performance Facility in Ohio. No team cameras, no scheduled workouts, no media rollout. Just two players in the cold, putting in work before the league had even officially moved into its next phase. And that detail right there is what makes this different. Because this wasn't Miami, it wasn't Los Angeles, it wasn't some warm, comfortable training destination where players usually disappear to reset and recharge. This was Ohio in the offseason. That's not where you go to relax. That's where you go when you're serious. It tells you this wasn't random, this wasn't convenience, this was intentional. Shedeur didn't wait for the Browns to organize OTAs. He didn't wait for the playbook meetings or the official reps. He went out and found his #1 receiver himself. And Jeudy, a sixth veteran who easily could have trained anywhere else, showed up. That alone says a lot. Because when a young quarterback and a veteran receiver make that kind of decision this early, it usually means one thing. They're trying to get ahead of something. Not just stay ready, but take control before the competition even begins. And make no mistake, that's exactly what this is about. Every throw in that session, every route run, every rep, it's all part of a much bigger picture. A picture where timing, chemistry, and trust could end up deciding who wins the most important job in that building. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because if you only saw the photo, you'd think this was a natural connection, like these two have always been in sync, like this partnership was inevitable. It wasn't. In fact, not that long ago, these two were on completely different pages in front of the entire league. And what happened between them before this moment is exactly why this workout carries so much weight. Not that long ago, this connection didn't look promising at all. In fact, it looked like it might fall apart before it ever had a chance to begin. It happened in the middle of a game that was already slipping away. Cleveland was struggling, the offense was out of rhythm, and frustration was starting to boil over. Then the cameras caught it. Jeudy on the sideline, animated, clapping his hands, leaning over a tablet, clearly not happy with what he was seeing. And right across from him, Shedeur Sanders, a rookie quarterback thrown into chaos, trying to process everything in real time. What followed wasn't subtle. Jeudy was talking, Sanders responded. The body language said everything. Sanders stood up. There was a visible disagreement, head shaking, tension. The kind of moment teams hate because it doesn't stay contained. It gets broadcast, replayed, dissected, and judged by millions within minutes. And that's exactly what happened. Social media lit up instantly. Clips spread everywhere. Fans started picking sides. Some blamed Jeudy, calling out his drops and questioning why a veteran receiver was pressing a young quarterback like that on the sideline. Others went after Sanders, saying he hadn't earned the right to push back yet. It became a full-blown narrative overnight, another example of dysfunction in Cleveland. And here's what made it worse. This wasn't happening in a vacuum. At that point in the season, Sanders had been thrown into one of the toughest situations imaginable. A fifth-round rookie with almost no first-team reps, suddenly expected to stabilize an offense that had been inconsistent all year. Protection was shaky, timing was off. The system itself was already under scrutiny. And now, on top of all that, he's dealing with visible sideline tension with his top receiver. That's a lot for any quarterback, let alone a 22-year-old still learning how to survive at this level. But the real story isn't just the argument, it's what happened after. Because once the cameras were gone and the noise started to settle, both players handled the situation in a way that quietly changed everything. Jeudy didn't dodge it, he addressed it. He admitted that it should have been handled differently, that those conversations belong off camera. No excuses, no deflection. And Sanders, he didn't take the easy route either.
He could have distanced himself. He could have let the criticism fall on Jeudy, especially with the drop issues becoming a major storyline at the time. But instead, he did the opposite. Week after week, when questions came up, Sanders stood in front of the media and backed his receiver. Publicly, consistently. There was even a moment after a costly mistake in a game where all eyes were on Jeudy, and Sanders stepped in and basically shut it down, saying his teammate was already hard enough on himself and didn't need more noise from the outside. Think about that for a second. A rookie quarterback, still trying to prove he belongs, choosing to protect a veteran receiver in the middle of a rough season. That's not something you fake. That's not something you're coached into saying. That's instinct. That's leadership showing up before anyone officially labels you as a leader. And slowly, without making headlines, something started to shift. What looked like frustration started turning into understanding. What looked like conflict started turning into communication. And what looked like a disconnect started becoming the foundation of something real. But even then, nobody expected what came next. Because the moment that truly changed how people saw this duo didn't happen on the sideline. It happened on the field. For weeks, it felt like everything between them was hanging by a thread. Miscommunication, mistimed routes, dropped passes. It all built this quiet tension that never fully went away, even after the sideline moment cooled off. You could see flashes of potential, but nothing that made you believe it was actually coming together. And then, in a single play, everything flipped. Week 14, Cleveland versus Tennessee. The kind of game that usually blends into the schedule unless something unforgettable happens. And on one snap, it did. Sanders drops back, the pocket starts to tighten, and for a split second, it looks like just another broken play. But instead of panicking, he resets, keeps his eyes downfield, and then he sees it. Jeudy breaking free. No hesitation, no second guessing. He lets it fly. The ball travels deep, cutting through the air with just enough arc to give his receiver a chance. And for the first time in what felt like forever, everything lines up perfectly. The timing, the placement, the route. Jeudy tracks it, secures it cleanly, and suddenly he's gone, racing downfield with nothing but open space ahead of him. Touchdown, 60 yards. But the real moment wasn't the throw, and it wasn't even the catch. It was what happened right after. Jeudy hits the end zone, flips in, and as the crowd erupts, there's this split second where everything slows down. He turns, finds Sanders, and instead of celebrating on his own, he drops to a knee. Sanders meets him there. The two share a genuine, unforced embrace right in the middle of the field. No words, no theatrics, just a moment that told you everything you needed to know. That wasn't just a touchdown, that was trust. Because plays like that don't happen when two players are guessing. They don't happen when there's hesitation or doubt. That throw only gets made when a quarterback believes his receiver is going to be exactly where he's supposed to be. And that catch only gets completed when a receiver trusts the ball is coming his way, no matter what. Up until that point, people were still questioning whether this pairing could actually work, whether the tension earlier in the season had done too much damage, whether the inconsistency was just who they were going to be. That play answered all of it in one shot. And just like that, the narrative changed. Suddenly, it wasn't about the argument anymore. It wasn't about the drops or the misfires. It was about what they could become if they actually figured it out. You could feel it. Fans started leaning in again. Analysts started pointing it out. There was something there. But here's the part that most people missed. That moment wasn't the finish line. It was the starting point. Because while that touchdown showed what was possible, what came after revealed how far they still had to go. That one touchdown made it easy to believe everything was fixed, but the numbers told a very different story. Because while that moment against Tennessee was real, it didn't erase what had been happening all season. And when you zoom out and actually look at Jerry Jeudy's 2025 production, it becomes impossible to ignore just how steep the drop-off was. This is a receiver who, just 1 year ago, looked like he had finally arrived. Nearly 90 catches, over 1,200 yards, playing like a true number one option. The kind of season that resets expectations and puts you in a completely different tier. But in 2025, it all fell apart. 50 receptions, just over 600 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's not a dip, that's a collapse. And the biggest issue wasn't just volume, it was reliability. The drops became the story. Not 1 or 2 bad games, not a rough stretch, an entire season where the ball simply didn't stick the way it's supposed to for a receiver at his level. 13 credited drops, the highest in the league, and some of them weren't even difficult plays. They were routine catches that elite receivers are expected to make without thinking.
It got to the point where every target felt uncertain. You could see it in the offense. Drives stalling, timing getting disrupted, quarterbacks hesitating just enough to throw everything off rhythm. Because when your number one option isn't dependable, it doesn't just hurt one play, it ripples through the entire system. And naturally, the noise started building. Analysts began questioning whether Cleveland should move on. Trade discussions started popping up. Not because Jeudy lacks talent, everyone knows he has it, but because consistency is everything at that position, and when that disappears, the margin for error vanishes with it. But here's where the conversation gets more complicated than most people want to admit. That season didn't happen under stable conditions. Jeudy wasn't catching passes from one quarterback. He was dealing with 3 different guys over the course of the year, each with a completely different style, different timing, different decision-making tendencies. One game, the ball arrives early, the next, it's late. One quarterback trusts you deep, another checks it down. That kind of inconsistency makes it harder for any receiver to settle into rhythm. And yet, that explanation only goes so far, because other players in that same offense managed to produce. The rookie tight end, working with the same revolving door at quarterback, still found ways to stay efficient, still made the plays that were there. Which brings you back to the uncomfortable truth. Some of this was on Jeudy. The advanced metrics backed it up. His efficiency dropped near the bottom of the league. His catch rate wasn't just low, it was alarmingly low for someone expected to carry an offense at times. These weren't just unlucky breaks, these were missed opportunities. And that's exactly why this offseason matters so much. Because right now, Jeudy isn't just fighting for a bounce-back year, he's fighting to prove that 2025 was an outlier, not the beginning of a trend. He's trying to rebuild trust with the coaching staff, with the organization, and most importantly, with the quarterback who's throwing in the ball. And that's where everything connects back to Shedeur Sanders. Because for Sanders to win this job, he needs a receiver he can rely on. And for Jeudy to silence the criticism, he needs a quarterback who believes in him enough to keep going his way. It's a two-way equation. And that's why that offseason workout wasn't just about getting reps in, it was about solving a problem that nearly broke this offense last year. But here's the catch. Even if they fix their chemistry, even if everything clicks between them, there's still one massive obstacle standing in the way.
For all the flashes, for all the potential, for all the moments that made fans believe, Shedeur Sanders is still not the starter. And that's the reality that changes everything. Because if you listen closely to how this offseason is being talked about inside the building, there's no sense of certainty around him, no quiet confirmation, no "this is our guy moving forward" energy. Instead, it's the opposite. It's cautious, it's measured, it's wide open. And when a young quarterback walks into that kind of situation, every single rep suddenly matters more than ever. On paper, his rookie season gave people just enough to be intrigued, but not enough to feel secure. 7 starts, a completion percentage under 60, more interceptions than touchdowns, a passer rating that didn't exactly jump off the page. If you just glance at the numbers, it doesn't scream future franchise quarterback. But numbers without context don't tell the full story, because what Sanders walked into wasn't a normal rookie situation. It was chaos. He wasn't developed slowly. He wasn't eased into the system. He was dropped right into the middle of a struggling offense with almost no preparation. No first-team reps in camp, a constantly shifting offensive line, receivers dealing with inconsistency, a coaching staff that was already losing control of the season.
That's not an environment built for success. That's survival. And in that environment, Sanders showed flashes that you can't teach. The ability to extend plays when protection breaks down, the instinct to keep his eyes up when everything around him collapses, the willingness to take hits and still deliver the ball downfield. Those are traits that don't show up cleanly in box scores, but they matter. Still, flashes aren't enough. Not in this league, not in this situation, because the Browns aren't in a position to wait around and hope it all comes together. There's too much pressure, too much money tied up at the position, too many expectations from a fan base that's been through this cycle over and over again. Which means Sanders isn't being evaluated on potential alone. He's being evaluated on whether he can take control of the job right now. And that's a completely different standard. He's not just competing against expectations, he's competing against other quarterbacks in the room. Players with more experience, players with different skill sets, players who, fairly or not, might look more ready in certain situations. So when you see him in Ohio, grinding in the offseason, building chemistry before anyone else, it's not just about improvement, it's about urgency. Because he knows something a lot of fans are still catching up to. If he doesn't clearly separate himself this offseason, if he doesn't force the coaching staff to make a decision they can't ignore, this job can disappear just as quickly as it felt like it appeared. And that's what makes this next part even more important, because the man making that decision doesn't owe him anything. And that's where the temperature in this entire situation drops, because Todd Monken didn't draft Shedeur Sanders. He didn't develop him. He didn't sit in those meeting rooms last year watching the ups and downs in real time. He walked into this building with a clean slate, and that changes the way every single quarterback is being judged. There's no emotional attachment here, no loyalty to past decisions, no pressure to justify what came before, just film, reps, and results. And from the moment Monken took the job, his message has been crystal clear. Nothing is being handed out. Every time he's been asked about the quarterback situation, the answer has stayed the same. Open competition, no frontrunner, no assumptions, just evaluation. On the surface, it sounds like standard coach talk, the kind of thing every new staff says to keep the room motivated. But if you listen a little closer, there's a different tone underneath it. Because Monken hasn't gone out of his way to crown Sanders. He hasn't hinted at a future built around him. Even when he's praised him, and he has, it's been measured, controlled. He'll talk about the playmaking ability, the unexpected mobility in the pocket, the flashes that show up on tape. But in the same breath, he'll remind everyone that flashes aren't enough to make a decision. That balance matters. It tells you exactly how he sees this situation. Not as a development project, not as a long-term investment that needs patience, but as a competition that needs a winner fast. And that creates both an opportunity and a problem for Sanders at the same time. The opportunity is obvious. A clean evaluation means he has a real shot. If he outperforms everyone in camp, if he commands the offense, if he shows the growth the organization has been talking about, Monken has no reason not to give him the job. There's nothing holding him back from making that call. But the problem is just as real, because that same neutrality means Sanders doesn't get the benefit of the doubt. He doesn't get extra time. He doesn't get a pass for last year's chaos. Monken is looking at what's in front of him right now, and if someone else looks more ready, more consistent, more in control, that's the direction this can go. And you can already see hints of that mindset in the way he talks about the room as a whole. He's pointed out that there simply isn't enough proven production from any of the quarterbacks over the last couple of seasons to lock anything in. Think about that for a second. Not enough to declare a starter. That's not just uncertainty, that's a reset. It means everyone is starting from zero. And in a reset, experience can suddenly carry more weight. Familiarity with NFL defenses, comfort in reading complex coverages, the ability to step into a huddle and command it without hesitation. Those are things coaches tend to lean on when wins matter immediately. Which brings you to the underlying tension in all of this. Because while Sanders is trying to prove he can become the future, Monken might be looking for whoever gives him the best chance to win right now, and those two timelines don't always match. That's what makes this next evaluation so cold. It's not about what Sanders could be, it's about whether he's already enough. And if he isn't, there's another name in that room that keeps coming up in conversations, quietly but consistently. A name that changes the entire equation.
And this is the part of the conversation that nobody in Cleveland really wants to sit with for too long. Because it doesn't feel good, it doesn't sound good, and it definitely doesn't fit the storyline people were hoping for. But it's real. Deshaun Watson is still in this picture. After everything, the injuries, the missed time, the inconsistency, the constant frustration, he's still here. Still on the roster, still getting reps, still being mentioned by the coaching staff as part of this open competition. And whether fans like it or not, that alone changes the entire dynamic of this quarterback battle. Because this isn't just any veteran sitting in the room. This is a quarterback tied to one of the largest financial commitments the league has ever seen. A player the organization invested heavily in, not just in terms of money, but in direction. You don't just erase that overnight, no matter how messy things have gotten. And yes, the reality of his time in Cleveland has been rough. Injuries have completely derailed any sense of continuity. A shoulder issue that stalled one season, then the Achilles tear. And just when it looked like he might be on track to return, another setback during recovery. Entire seasons slipping away, momentum gone before it ever had a chance to build. At times, it's felt like he's been more of an idea than an actual presence on the field. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. There are still people, inside and around the league, who believe that if he's healthy, he might give this team the most stable option at quarterback. Not the most exciting, not the long-term answer, but the most predictable. And that belief hasn't disappeared. In fact, there's been quiet buzz, nothing officially confirmed, but enough to get attention, suggesting that some around the league see Watson as a legitimate contender, maybe even a slight edge heading into this competition, not because of what he's done recently, but because of what he's shown in the past. Now, to be clear, that's not a guarantee, it's not even a consensus, it's just what's being said. But even that is enough to shift the pressure. Because if you're Shedeur Sanders, you're no longer just competing against other young quarterbacks trying to prove themselves. You're competing against a player who, at his peak, operated at an elite level in this league. A player who has seen every defensive look, handled every situation, and understands the speed of the game in a way that only comes with experience. And for a coach like Monken, who needs results quickly, that matters. Even if Watson isn't the same player he once was, the question becomes simple. Does he still have enough left to run the offense more efficiently right now? That's the question nobody can confidently answer yet. Because physically, there are still major unknowns, 2 serious setbacks to the same area of the body, limited recent game action, no clear proof that he can handle a full season at this stage.
That's not something you can just assume away. But until that answer shows up on the field, he remains part of the equation. And that's what makes this situation so complicated. The Browns can't fully move forward without resolving it. They can't ignore the investment. They can't pretend he's not there. So instead, they're doing the only thing they can do, letting it play out. Which means every throw Sanders makes, every rep he takes, every bit of chemistry he builds with Jeudy, it's all happening under one simple reality. He's not just trying to win a job, he's trying to take it from someone the organization once believed was the answer. And that's a completely different kind of pressure. Because no matter how much momentum he builds, no matter how sharp he looks, as long as Watson is still in that room, this competition isn't just open, it's unpredictable. And this is where that off-season workout stops looking like a small detail and starts looking like the most important move of Shedeur Sanders' entire off-season. Because once you understand everything surrounding this situation, the open competition, the uncertainty at quarterback, the presence of Watson, the pressure from a new coaching staff, you realize that nothing about that session with Jeudy was random. It was strategic. Think about the timing. Before OTAs, before the depth chart even begins to take shape, before the coaching staff gets extended time on the field with the players, that's when Sanders made his move. Not when it was required, when it was optional. That tells you everything about his mindset. He's not waiting to be developed. He's not sitting back and hoping things fall into place. He's actively trying to build an advantage before the competition even officially begins. And in a situation this tight, that kind of head start can be the difference between winning the job and watching someone else take it. Because chemistry isn't something you just turn on overnight. It shows up in the small details. Timing on routes, trust on contested throws, knowing where your receiver is going to be before he even makes his break. Those things only come from reps, and the more you have before everyone else, the sharper you look when it actually counts. That's what Sanders is chasing. And then there's the other side of it, Jeudy choosing to be there.
A veteran receiver coming off one of the most criticized seasons of his career had every reason to train quietly, fix his issues on his own, and avoid the spotlight. But instead, he showed up alongside the very quarterback he had visible tension with just months earlier. That's not accidental either. That's a receiver acknowledging that if his career is going to bounce back, it's going to be tied directly to whoever is throwing him the ball. And more specifically, it's tied to building something real with Sanders before the season even starts. Because trust goes both ways. Sanders needs to believe Jeudy is going to make the catch when it matters, and Jeudy needs to believe the ball is coming his way, even after the mistakes, even after the criticism. That kind of connection doesn't come from team meetings or playbook installs. It comes from sessions like this, unstructured, focused, intentional. And when you put it all together, the meaning behind that workout becomes a lot clearer. This wasn't just about improving, it was about sending a message to the coaching staff that Sanders is taking control of his development, a message to the locker room that he's willing to lead even without the title, and maybe most importantly, a message to everyone else in that quarterback room that he's not approaching this like a backup waiting for a chance. He's approaching it like the job is his to take. Because in a competition where nothing is guaranteed, the players who separate themselves early are usually the ones who force decisions later. And Sanders is trying to do exactly that, force a decision. But even that level of preparation doesn't exist in a vacuum, because behind all of this, behind the competition, the workouts, the narratives, there's something even bigger shaping how this situation is going to play out. Something that has nothing to do with talent and everything to do with money. And this is the layer most fans don't fully see, but it's the one that quietly controls everything. Because no matter how good Shedeur Sanders looks, no matter how much chemistry he builds with Jeudy, no matter how open this competition is supposed to be, there's a financial reality sitting underneath all of it that the Browns cannot ignore: the Deshaun Watson contract. This isn't just a big deal, it's one of the biggest financial commitments in NFL history, and when a team is tied to that kind of number, every decision around it becomes more complicated than just football. That's why the restructure happened. On the surface, it looks like a positive move. The Browns converted a massive portion of Watson's salary into a bonus, freeing up over $30 million in cap space. Suddenly, the team has flexibility. They can make moves in free agency. They can improve the roster. They can build something more competitive around whoever ends up starting at quarterback. But that's only half the story, because restructures like this aren't about long-term belief. They're about short-term management. This move wasn't a signal that Watson is the future. It was a signal that the Browns are trying to survive the present while setting up an eventual exit, a financial reset that gives them room now while quietly pushing the real consequences down the line. And those consequences are massive. Once this season is over, the Browns have a path, finally, to move on. It won't be clean, it won't be cheap. In fact, it could result in one of the largest dead cap hits the league has ever seen, but it will be possible. And for the first time since that deal was made, there's a clear endpoint on the horizon, which makes 2026 a bridge year. Not just for Watson, for the entire quarterback situation. This season isn't about locking in a long-term answer tied to a contract. It's about figuring out who actually deserves to lead this team once the financial weight is gone. Who can step in when the reset finally happens. And that changes how everything is evaluated. Because now, it's not just about who looks good in camp. It's about who gives the Browns the best direction moving forward. Who can justify being the guy after the Watson chapter officially closes. And here's where it all connects back to Sanders. He's the only quarterback in that room who represents a clean future. No massive contract attached, no financial baggage, no complicated exit strategy. If he wins the job and proves he can handle it, the Browns suddenly have clarity, a way forward that isn't tied to past decisions. But if he doesn't clearly separate himself, if there's doubt, if the competition stays close, then the financial reality makes things messy again. Because even if Watson isn't the long-term answer, the investment alone can keep him in the conversation longer than fans might expect. Not because he's playing at an elite level, but because moving on from him comes with consequences the organization has to be ready to absorb. So while this battle looks like it's about performance on the field, it's also being shaped by numbers behind the scenes, cap space, dead money, future flexibility. That's the part nobody chants about on Sundays, but it's the part that influences who gets the opportunity in the first place. And when you put all of that together, the picture becomes clear. This isn't just a quarterback competition, it's a transition, a final chapter of one era and the potential beginning of another, which brings everything back to the same question that's been quietly building this entire time. And when you step back and look at the full picture, it all comes down to this moment. Not last season, not the draft, not the hype when Shedeur Sanders first arrived in Cleveland. Right now. Because this is the window. For the first time since he entered the league, everything is lined up in a way that gives him a real shot. But at the same time, nothing is guaranteed. The job isn't his. The coaching staff isn't tied to him. The competition isn't going away. And the financial reality of the roster means the team is actively searching for clarity, not waiting on potential. That's a rare kind of pressure. And it's also a rare kind of opportunity, because situations like this don't stay open for long. Teams don't operate in uncertainty forever. At some point, whether it's during camp, preseason, or early in the regular season, a decision gets made, a direction gets chosen, and once that happens, the window either closes or it slams shut. That's why everything he's doing right now matters more than it might seem on the surface. The extra reps, the early chemistry with Jeudy, the decision to show up before anyone asked him to. Those aren't just good habits, they're signals. Signs of a quarterback who understands exactly what's at stake and isn't willing to leave it up to chance. Because if he takes control of this competition, if he walks into camp sharper, more prepared, more in sync than everyone else, and forces the coaching staff to see him as the clear answer, then everything changes. The narrative flips, the future becomes his, and the Browns finally have a direction that isn't tied to the past. But if he doesn't, if the inconsistency shows up again, if the separation isn't clear, if someone else in that room looks more ready in the moments that matter, then this could all slip away just as quickly as it came together. And that's what makes this entire situation so compelling. It's not decided yet, it's not written, it's unfolding in real time. one off-season workout, one training session, one throw at a time. So when you look back at that image, Shedeur, Sanders and Jeudy in a quiet facility in Ohio, it stops looking like a simple snapshot. It starts looking like the beginning of something. The beginning of a takeover, or the beginning of another unanswered question in Cleveland. And the only thing left now is to see which one it becomes.